The memo came down at 4 in the afternoon, and by 6 the cleaning crew on the 44th floor had been cut from 9 people to 4. Odessa Pratt was one of the 5 let go. She had cleaned that floor for 11 years. She found out the way the powerless always find out, from a printed sheet taped beside the time clock, her name 8th on a list of 12, the letters of it slightly crooked because the printer in the basement had been dying for a year and nobody had replaced it. She read her own name twice. Then she folded the apron she had brought from home, because the company aprons were thin, and she liked one that held its shape, and she set it on the cart, and she did not cry. She was 61 years old, and she had been let go before, and she knew that crying in front of the time clock only made the next morning heavier. A younger woman from the crew, a girl named Tamika, who had 2 kids and a third on the way, found Odessa in the locker room a few minutes later, and the girl was shaking, and the list in her hand had her name on it too. She kept asking what they were supposed to do now, the way you ask the air when there is no one above you to ask. Odessa did not have an answer that would fix anything, so she gave the only thing she had. She took the girl's hands and held them still until they stopped. Shaking, she told her to breathe. She told her they would each go home tonight and feed their families and sleep, and that the morning would still come, and that nothing got solved standing in a basement at 6 o'clock, crying onto a list a dying printer had spit out. The girl steadied. That was Odessa's whole gift. The gift of going calm in the exact moment everyone around her went to pieces, and she had been giving it away for free her whole life, in basements and depots and on stoops, to anyone the night had knocked down. Reggie, the night supervisor who had worked beside her for 8 of the 11 years, walked them both to the freight door at the end of the shift because he could not bring himself to say goodbye at the time clock. He told her low that the cut had not come from him, that he had fought it upstairs and lost, that a man behind a desk 40 floors up had drawn a line through 40% of his people without ever once coming down to learn a single name. Odessa told him not to carry it. She told him a man who fights for his people and loses still fought, and that she would not have him losing sleep over a thing he could not stop. Then she walked out into the cold and waited for the crosstown bus, her good apron folded under her arm, and she went home. What she did not know, what no one in that basement could have told her, was that the man who had signed the order to thin the crew had eaten from her hands for the better part of a year, a long time ago, in a city 2 states away, before he had a tower with his name near the top of it. His name was Elias Crane, and he was worth $4.3 billion, and he had not thought about the woman who fed him in 11 years. Let me take you back, because a story like this one only works if you understand what kindness costs when the person giving it has almost nothing. Odessa came up in a part of the city where the buses ran late and the rent ran early. Her mother had cleaned houses, and her grandmother before that had cleaned a school, and so when Odessa took the night shift at a building downtown, she did not feel it as a come-down. She felt it as the family trade, honest and tiring, and hers. She raised a daughter on it. When the daughter grew up and moved south for a nursing job, Odessa stayed, because the city was where her people were buried, and where her church was, and where she knew the name of every bus driver on the crosstown line. For 9 of those years, before the tower, before any of it, she had worked a different building, a transit depot on the east side, a great echoing hall of tile and benches where men and women waited through the night for the early buses. She mopped that hall from 11 at night until 7 in the morning, and because she could not stand to watch a person go hungry while she ate, she had started doing a thing that her supervisor never knew about and would not have allowed. She made too much food on purpose. Every shift she brought a tin pot of something simple, rice and beans, or a pan of cornbread, or a stew thinned out so it would feed more mouths than it was meant to. She kept it warm on a hot plate in the supply closet, against every rule. And when the night got long and the depot filled with the people who had nowhere better to be, the ones who rode the buses in slow circles just to stay out of the cold, she fed them. Bowl here, a wedge of bread there. She never made a show of it. She set a bowl down on the bench beside a person, and she kept mopping, and she let them keep whatever dignity the night had not already taken. One of those people was a young man with a duffel bag and a cracked phone and a stare that had gone flat. The way a stare goes flat when a person has stopped expecting anything good. He was 26 then. He had come to the city for a job that fell through in the first week, and the apartment he had signed for evaporated with it, and he was too proud to call home and too broke to leave. He slept in the depot 4 nights out of 7. The other 3 he slept in a car that belonged to a man he barely knew until that arrangement ended. 2. Odessa never asked his story. She just started setting a second bowl down on his bench every night without a word, the way you would for family. And the first night he tried to refuse it, she did the thing she always did. She did not argue, she did not lecture. She just left the bowl and walked her mop down the long tile floor and gave him room to eat it without anyone watching, and when she came back, the bowl was empty. His name then was not Elias Crane. He had not become that man yet. He was just a hungry boy at a bus depot, and she fed him for 11 months, and on the worst night of that whole stretch, the night he had decided he was going home defeated, she did something he never forgot. It was the coldest week of that winter, and the heat in the depot had failed, and the people on the benches sat in their coats with their hands jammed in their pockets, and the boy had not eaten in 2 days because pride had finally outweighed hunger, and he had stopped letting her see how bad it was. She saw, anyway. She always saw. She set the bowl down beside him that night the way she always did, and for the first time in 11 months he did not pick it up. He just looked at it. Then he told her, finally in a voice scraped down to nothing, that he was leaving in the morning, that he had failed, that the bus south left at 6 and he would be on it, and he would go home and take whatever they had to say to him, and that would be the end of it. She had listened. She did not tell him it would be all right, because she did not lie to people, and a woman who had cleaned floors for 30 years knew that sometimes it was not all right. She just listened, leaning on her mop in the cold hall, while the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and a bus sighed at the curb outside. Then she set the mop against the bench, and she reached into her apron, the good apron she brought from home, and she pulled out a folded bill and pressed it into his hand and closed his fingers over it. It was a 50. It was, he would learn much later, very close to the last of what she had that week, the part she had set aside for her own groceries, and she gave it to a boy whose last name she had never thought to ask. She told him to use it for the part he could not see yet. She told him a boy who said, "Thank you," the way he did, soft and, like he meant it, was not a boy who failed. She told him to stay 1 more week. Then she went back to her mop. He stayed a week, became a job became a foothold across 22 years, and a great deal of work, and a measure of luck. He never pretended he had earned a loan, became a company, and then a bigger company, and then the kind of money that buys a tower and puts your name near the top of it. And somewhere in the climb, the boy at the depot quietly closed over the way a wound closes. And the man who walked into rooms full of lawyers stopped, letting himself remember how close he had come to riding that 6 o'clock bus into the rest of an ordinary beaten life. He remembered the depot the way you remember an illness. He did not go looking for the woman. He told himself she would not want to be found, that charity went sour when you came back to dangle a thank you over it, that the kindest thing was to leave her in peace. These were good-sounding reasons. Underneath them was a simpler one. He did not want to remember being that hungry, and so he forgot her on purpose a little more each year, until she was a warm blur with no face and no name. That is the thing about a debt you owe to someone poor. The world will never come to collect it for them. You have to remember on your own. Elias Crane had forgotten. So when the quarterly numbers came in soft, and the board started using the word efficiency the way they always did when they meant cut, and a consulting firm with a clean logo, and 3 young people in good shoes recommended trimming overhead in the buildings, Elias signed off on it the way he signed off on 40 things a day. The slide deck was clean and grey and full of charts. One of the young consultants stood at the head of the long table and used a laser pointer to walk him through a chart where the line for janitorial overhead crossed the line for projected savings, and the room nodded, and someone said the word leanness, and Elias, who had stopped really listening somewhere around the second chart, said the thing executives say, which was to do it and bring him the new number. Facilities, night cleaning. reduce headcount by 40% across the portfolio. He did not read the names. There were no names on the page he saw, only account and a savings figure with a $sign in front of it. There was a number, and the number got smaller, and he moved on to the next thing, and not one cell in his body told him that he had just signed his way back into a cold depot he had spent 22 years forgetting. 11 floors below his office, his own crews were being cut. And on the 44th floor, a woman who had once pressed the last of her money into his palm at 6 in the morning folded her good apron, set it on a cart, and went home on the crosstown bus for what she believed was the last time. She did not connect the man whose name was on the building to the boy at the depot. Why would she? She had fed 100 people over the years. Faces ran together. And the name on the tower was just a name to her, the way the names of the powerful are always just names to the people who clean up after them. What neither of them knew that grey afternoon was that the company had a policy, a small bureaucratic kindness buried in the employee handbook that would put the two of them in the same room one more time. Severance for anyone with more than 10 years of service had to be signed for in person at the corporate office by an officer of the company. It was meant to look generous in a press release. It was that quarter going to do something the press release never imagined. Let me slow down here, because the days between the firing and that room are where the real weight of this story lives. Odessa went home that first night, and she did the arithmetic everyone in her position does. Rent was $940 a month. Her last full check would carry her through to the middle of the next month. The severance, whatever it came to, might stretch that to the end of summer. After that, there was the small Social Security check, which did not cover the rent by itself, and there was her sister Lottie, who had a spare room and a bad hip and would take her in before she would let her be put out, and who would never once mention it again, which was its own kind of grace and its own kind of weight. She did not panic. She had a way of meeting hard news that her granddaughter, Maya, who was 16 and lived 2 hours away with Odessa's daughter, called Grandma's quiet. She made a pot of tea. She turned the radio to the gospel station low. She sat at the kitchen table with the lease and the calendar, and she made the situation small enough to hold. Then she did the thing she always did with trouble. She went and did something useful for someone else, because a body in motion does not sink as fast as a body sitting still. There was a young woman 2 doors down, a single mother named Rinelle, with a baby boy not yet 1 year old, and a job at a packing plant that started at 7 before the daycare opened its doors. And for a year, Odessa had been watching that baby for an hour each morning, for nothing, because Rinelle could not afford a sitter, and because Odessa was up anyway, and a baby is a good thing to hold when the house is quiet. The morning after she lost her job, Odessa was on that stoop at 6:15, on time, in her coat, with her arms out, like always. The baby reached for her the way he always did, both fists open, and she took him and settled him on her hip and felt the small, warm weight of him steady something in her chest that the printed list had knocked loose. Rinelle came out, buttoning her plant uniform, and saw Odessa's face, and went still because the whole block had heard about the layoffs by then. She started to say something soft and apologetic, something about how she could find another way, how Odessa did not have to keep coming now that she had her own worries. And Odessa shook her head before the girl could finish and said the only thing that needed saying. She said the baby still needed holding, whether or not she had a job, and a job had never once been the reason she came. She said it plainly, no martyr in it, the way you state a fact about the weather, and she shifted the baby higher on her hip and told Rinelle to go on, or she would miss her bus. Rinelle went, looking back twice, and Odessa stood on the stoop in the grey morning, bouncing a baby who was not hers, and humming low, and the day she had every reason to spend afraid of her own future, she spent, instead, being exactly where a young mother needed her to be. That was the whole of her. She lost the floor she had cleaned for 11 years, and her first move the next morning was to keep a promise to a baby. Nobody filmed it. Nobody clapped. The world keeps a ledger even when no one is standing there to write it down. And that morning the ledger gained a line. That same week her granddaughter called. Maya was 16. 2 hours south, and she had heard from her mother that Grandma had lost her job, and the girl's voice on the phone was trying so hard to sound grown that it broke Odessa's heart a little. Maya said maybe she should not do the nursing program after all. Maybe she should get a job after high school instead and help out. Maybe college was too much money, with everything the way it was. Odessa shut that down so fast and so gently that the girl never finished the sentence. She told Maya that a child worrying about a grandmother's rent was the world turned upside down, and that she would clean every floor in this city on her knees before she let Maya trade a nursing degree for a paycheck at 16. She told her that the women in this family had cleaned for other people for 3 generations, so that one day a girl in this family would be the one being cleaned up after, in good scrubs, with a badge that said nurse. And that Maya was that girl, and that was not up for discussion. The girl laughed Wes into the phone and said, "Yes, ma'am," and Odessa hung up and sat with the calendar, and did not let her granddaughter hear the arithmetic underneath it. The severance letter came in the mail 9 days later. It instructed her to appear at the corporate office on the 30th on the 51st floor to sign for her payment in person. It listed a sum that was more than she expected and less than 11 years should have been worth, and it was printed on heavy paper with a company name across the top, the same name that was on the building, and she read that name and felt nothing in particular because it was just a name. She almost did not go. The bus to that part of downtown took 2 transfers and most of a morning, and the indignity of riding back up to the floors she had cleaned in her good clothes now as a visitor, to be paid to leave, sat on her like a wet coat. But the money was real and the rent was real, so on the morning of the 30th, she pressed her best blouse, the navy one with the small buttons, and she pinned her hair, and she rode 2 buses downtown to sign for the end of 11 years. The lobby was all marble and glass, and the guard at the desk did not recognize her out of her uniform, which told her something about how invisible she had been even to the people she passed every night. He sent her up to 51. She had never been to 51. The cleaning crews did not do the executive floor. A different company handled that, a fancier one, and the carpet up there was so thick her shoes made no sound. A young woman at a desk the size of a bed took her name and asked her to wait. And Odessa sat in a chair that cost more than her rent and folded her hands in her lap and kept her back straight the way her mother had taught her to sit in rooms that were not built for her. Here is where the dramatic irony tightened to a wire, because the officer assigned to sign the 10-year severances that morning, by the rotation of a calendar no one thought twice about, was the chief executive himself. It was a photo op, really. The board liked the optics of the founder personally handing the envelopes to the long-tenured workers being let go, a human face on a cold number, a picture for the annual report. 3 workers were scheduled that morning. Odessa was the second. She did not know whose office she was walking into. She knew only that a man would hand her an envelope and she would sign a paper and ride the bus home. The assistant opened a door, and Odessa walked into a corner office with a wall of glass and the whole grey city spread out below it, and a tall man in a charcoal suit stood up from behind a desk and came around it with his hand out and a practiced, kind, distant smile on his face. The smile of a man who has handed out 100 envelopes and felt each one for exactly the length of a handshake. He did not look at her closely. He looked at the folder on his desk. He had a system. He shook the hand. He said a warm and forgettable thing about service and gratitude. He slid the envelope across. He indicated the line for the signature. He had done it twice already that month. He was, if you want the plain truth of it, already thinking about a call he had at 11. Odessa took the envelope. She thanked him because she thanked people, even people who were paying her to disappear. She bent to sign the line. And as she bent, her name badge swung forward on its lanyard, the laminated company badge they made every worker wear, the one with her photo from 11 years ago, and her name printed under it in plain black letters, and it turned in the light and lay flat on the desk for 1 second between his eyes and the page. Pratt. Odessa Pratt. He read it. The way you read a word in a language you used to speak. For a half-second, the name was only letters. Then it was a sound, and the sound was a woman's voice in a cold, tile hall at 5 in the morning, setting a bowl down on a bench. Odessa. Someone in the depot had said it once, calling across the floor, and he had filed it away in the part of a starving boy's mind that holds on to the names of the people who are kind to him. And then he had buried that part, along with everything else from that winter, and now here it was, laminated, hanging from a lanyard, 6 inches from his hand. The pen was still in her hand, the city was still grey in the glass, the assistant was already half-turned to fetch the third worker. And Elias Crane stood there, with his practiced smile cooling on his face, and read the name on a janitor's badge, and felt the floor of 22 years drop out from under him. Odessa. He had never known her last name. In all those nights at the depot he had never once asked it, and she had never once offered it, and so the name on the badge meant nothing on its own. But the first name, said in his own head, in her own voice, the voice that had set a bowl on a bench and walked away to give him room to eat. Odessa. The boy at the depot stood up inside the Billionaire and looked out through his eyes at a 61-year-old woman in a pressed navy blouse signing away 11 years of her life on a line he had drawn. He did not say her name. Not yet. He was not sure his voice would hold it. He looked at her face, really looked, the way he had not looked at any of the 100 faces he had passed that month, and there it was, older, lined, tired around the eyes, but unmistakably the face that had decided a hungry stranger was worth feeding for 11 months and worth $50 on the worst morning of his life. She did not know him, of course she did not. He had been a boy with a duffel bag and a flat stare. He was a tall man in a charcoal suit now, with grey at his temples, and a name on the building. Time had hidden him from her completely. She finished the signature and straightened up and slid the paper back across the desk and said, in a voice he knew, that she appreciated the years and wished the company well. Then she reached for her purse to go. He said her name. He did not say it the way an executive says a name off a folder. He said it the way the boy at the depot would have said it. Quiet, and like he meant it, soft the way she had once told him meant he was not a boy who failed. She stopped. She looked at him. Something moved behind her eyes. Not recognition yet, but the first stir of it, the feeling you get when a song you have not heard in 20 years comes on 3 rooms away. He asked her if she had ever worked at the transit depot on the east side, the one on the avenue, the all-night hall, a long time ago. The purse strap slid off her shoulder. She said she had. 9 years on that floor. A long time ago. He asked, and his voice was not steady now, if she remembered a young man with a duffel bag who slept on the benches one winter, who was leaving on the morning bus, the one she gave $50 to and told to stay 1 more week. The office went very quiet. Out beyond the glass, the grey city did not change at all. Odessa looked at the tall man in the charcoal suit, and the years came off him, in her eyes, the way fog comes off a window, and she put one hand to her mouth and the other to the edge of the desk to steady herself, and she said his name, the only name she had ever known him by, the name he had given her at the depot before he was Elias Crane. She said, "You were the boy," the one who said thank you like he meant it. He came around the desk. He did not shake her hand this time. He took both of her hands in both of his, the same hands that had once been empty and shaking, and had taken a bowl from her on a bench, and he held them, and for a moment the chief executive of a $4 billion company could not speak at all. When he could, he told her the truth, all of it, fast and low, that she had fed him for 11 months, that the $50 had been the reason he stayed, the only reason, that he had been at the door of giving up, and she had put her own grocery money in his hand and sent him back into the fight, that every good thing in the 22 years since had grown from a week she bought him with money she did not have, that he had built all of this, and she was standing in the middle of it, and he had almost let it pay her to go away without ever once knowing her name. And then, because a man who has just understood what he nearly did has to sit down, he sat down on the edge of his own desk, this billionaire, and he wept, and he did not hide it. Odessa did the thing she had always done. She did not make a show of his crying. She put a hand on his shoulder, the way you do for family, and she let him have it without anyone watching, and she said the thing she had said to 100 people on 100 long nights. She said it was all right. She said she had only done what a person does. She said she had never once thought about getting it back, That was exactly why it was coming back. That was the whole shape of it. She had fed him expecting nothing, and now nothing was the last thing the morning was going to give her. He asked her, when he could speak, to tell him how she was, not as a courtesy. He wanted the arithmetic, the real numbers, the way she had once wanted to know nothing about him and had fed him anyway. So she told him plainly, because she was too old to be coy about money in a room like that. The rent was $940. The job had been most of how she paid it. The severance would carry her to the end of summer. After that, there was her sister's spare room and the small check, and she would be all right, because she had always been all right. She told him about Renal's baby. She watched for nothing. She told him about Maya, the granddaughter, who was bright as a new dime and wanted to be a nurse like her mother and worried, at 16, about money in a way no 16-year-old should. She told him these things not to ask for anything, because asking was not in her, but because he asked and because she had learned long ago that the truth costs less than a lie when you are tired. He listened to all of it the way she had once listened to him at the depot, without interrupting, with his whole face. Then he did not make a speech. He had learned from her a long time ago that the kindest help is the kind that does not stand over you while you take it. So he did not hand her a check across the desk and watch her face while she read the number. He told her simply that she was not fired, that the order had been a number on a page and he had not read the names, and that this was his failure and not hers, and that he was ashamed of it. He told her the cut was reversed for her and for the 4 others on her floor whose names he asked her to write down for him before she left, which she did, in her careful hand, because she was not the kind of person who climbed out of a hole and left the others in it. He did not stop at the job, though, because the job was not the debt. The job was 11 years and a fair wage, and she had earned every dollar of it on her own knees. The debt was a different thing, an older thing, and it had been collecting interest in the dark for 22 years. And a man who had just understood what he owed could not simply hand a woman back the thing he had taken and call the books even. Over the weeks that followed, quietly, the way she had always done things, he paid the debt the way it had been given to him. Not with a single grand gesture for a camera, with a steadiness that looked like her own. He did not summon her to an office and read a number off a check. He had learned better than that at her own hands. He worked it the slow way through accountants and a quiet attorney, the way she had worked her kindness through a hot plate in a supply closet where no one had to watch the helping and feel small under it. The rent on the apartment she had nearly lost was paid off, the whole building bought, and the rents on it frozen, so that Renelle 2 doors down and the old man on the first floor with the oxygen tank and everyone else in that building who had been 1 bad month from the street could stop holding their breath. He did not put his name on it. He let her think for a while that the landlord had simply had a change of heart, until she worked it out the way she worked everything out, by paying attention, and she called him and told him it was too much. He told her, gently, that $50 from a person who had nothing was worth more than all of this from a person who had everything, and that he was only now beginning to catch up, and that she should let an old debtor pay what he owed before he ran out of years to pay it in. She went quiet on the phone for a long moment. Then she said, "All right." It was the hardest thing she had done all year, letting somebody do for her, and she did it the way she did everything else, with her back straight. He set up the thing that mattered most to her in the quietest way of all. Maya, the granddaughter who wanted to be a nurse, would not have to lie awake at 16 doing arithmetic. School was handled, all of it. From the first day to the last, a fund in the girl's name that no downturn could touch. When Odessa understood what he had done, she did not gush. She sat down at her kitchen table, with the gospel station low, and she put her face in her hands, not from grief this time, and her sister Lottie sat with her and held the back of her neck the way she had when they were girls. And Elias Crane changed something in himself that no one outside that office ever heard about, which is the way the realest changes always happen. He went looking, on purpose now, for the woman at the depot he could no longer find, because she had moved or passed, and where he could not find the person he had wronged by forgetting, he gave to the place. He funded the all-night hall on the east side. one with the benches, so that the people who rode the buses in slow circles to stay warm would have a hot meal waiting and a cot if they needed it, and a person paid to set a bowl down beside them and walk away to let them keep their dignity. He named none of it after himself. He named it after a thing she had said to him once, on the worst morning of his life, about the part a person cannot see yet. He asked Odessa only once if she would come and look at it before it opened. She rode out there on a bright, cold morning, 2 buses and a transfer, the way she always travelled, because a car with a driver had been offered, and she had said no thank you. She would take the bus. She had always taken the bus. She walked into the great echoing hall where she had mopped from 11 at night until 7 in the morning for 9 years of her life, and the smell of it hit her first. Bleach and old tile, and now under it something cooking. And she stopped just inside the door and put her hand flat against the wall, the way you touch the doorframe of a house you grew up in. The benches were gone. In their place stood long tables with clean cloths, and a serving line down one wall, with deep pans steaming under warming lights, and a corkboard where a person could pin a notice looking for work or a room. There were cots folded against the far wall for the nights the cold turned cruel. And there, halfway down the hall, a young woman in an apron was setting a bowl down beside a man with a duffel bag and walking away to give him room. She stood in the doorway a long time. She did not cry the way you might think. She had a way of meeting good news that was the same as her way of meeting bad, quiet, with her back straight. She watched the young woman in the apron do the thing she had done 10,000 times in that very hall, and she understood that the kindness had not stopped when she stopped. It had simply changed hands. It had gone out into the world on a 6 o'clock bus 22 years ago in the pocket of a boy who said thank you like he meant it, and it had grown, and it had come all the way back around to this room to feed the next hungry person on the next long night. Elias stood beside her in the doorway, not as a billionaire and not as her boss, just as the boy she had fed, grown old enough now to understand what she had done. He told her quietly that he had spent 22 years thinking he had climbed out of that depot on his own, and that he had been wrong, and that the truth was he had been carried out of it in a tin pot of rice and beans by a woman who never even asked his last name. Odessa looked at the young woman in the apron, and at the steam, and at the benches that were tables now, and she said the truest thing she knew, the thing that was the whole moral of her whole long life if she had ever stopped to name it, which she had not, because people like Odessa do not name such things, they only live them. She said that a person does not feed a hungry man to get fed back. A person feeds a hungry man because he is hungry. And if it comes back, she said, it comes back as a surprise the way grace always does. And you say thank you, and you keep setting the bowls down because there is always another night and always another bench and always somebody on it. Then she went and tied on an apron, her own good apron from home, the one she had folded and set on a cart the day they let her go, and she walked the length of the hall to where a young man with a flat stare sat alone, and she set a bowl down beside him without a word, and she walked away down the long floor to give him room to eat it without anyone watching. The job came back, and the rent was paid, and the girl would be a nurse, and the old debtor was finally, after 22 years, beginning to catch up. But that was never the picture Odessa kept. The picture she kept was the steam, and the bowl, and the back of a young man, bent over it in a warm room on a cold night, eating. The way she had once fed a boy who grew up to remember her name when he read it off a badge in a tower, with his name near the top. She had no idea all those years ago whose whole life her kindness was holding up, and by the time she found out, she had already gone right on holding up the next one.